an expert at this stuff, right? And everybody, when they heard EPO, I think had a more stronger reaction than anything else that we've had up to this point. From your point of view, did this elicit a stronger reaction in you?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily. I mean, I try to avoid, kind of judging or ranking, drugs that are prohibited. I think cheating and breaking the rules is breaking the rules. But I am very familiar with EPO from the days of investigating professional cycling, and I always thought it would translate over almost perfectly to an MMA fighter. The benefits that you can get from it, it increases red blood cell count, which in turn can increase your endurance. And then it also has great recovery properties. So somebody who's putting their body through rough training like an MMA fighter would, could conceivably take that, wake up the next morning and feel ready to go all over again. So, when you combine those things, I think a very, concerning properties that could give definitely an unfair advantage to a fighter in this sport.
When we heard the news first about TJ, it was the New York State Athletic Commission that we heard from first. Was this a New York State Athletic Commission test, or was this a USADA test?
No, this was a USADA test. So in instances like this, where the commission will also have jurisdiction, they will give those results to a commission, and the commission can adjudicate on their own. And they did a little bit faster than USADA did, and that's why that came out first. And the USADA, sanction came out after that. But it's from the same test, and it was a USADA test.
It was a USADA test.
Yeah.
Had he been tested for EPO before? Because I think that's the big question on everybody's mind, right? Why was it here and not done previously?
Yeah, absolutely. And all morning, people have been coming up to me, why didn't they test for EPO? So that is completely inaccurate. They did. He was tested for EPO. Now, it is accurate that EPO is a special analysis test, so it's not necessarily done on every sample. It's cost prohibitive. It's $500 to $800 more per test, depending where the laboratory it's done at. But it's also the case that it's not done randomly. They're not picking names out of a hat. All the testing, which USADA calls it, is strategic testing. There's a reason behind every test that they do. And when it comes to EPO analysis, what I believe they're doing is looking at passport information. So they're looking at urine and blood markers over time. That data is put into a computer, and there's an algorithm that would spit out something that would have a red flag or be a little bit suspicious. And those fighters are the ones that they want to dedicate those extra testing dollars to. They did confirm to me yesterday both of the Garbrandt fights, as well as the Lineker and Asensio fight. He had EPO tests done on his samples both before and I believe in all cases immediately after. So it's not the case that they weren't testing him for EPO. They were, and he was negative.
I understand it's a blood test, correct?
No, it's a urine test. It is.
So this thing that Cody Garbrandt and Ali Abdelaziz put out that they wanted the old urine tested, and it turns out it's not around. Is there truth to that? And if so, that's
well, first off, I mean, there was one around from December. They went back and did retest, and it came up positive. I spoke with them yesterday. They are going through all the laboratories' databases to find out if there's any samples that weren't originally screened for EPO, and they would go back and retest those at this point. I don't think that's the case. I think that they were doing EPO screenings on him all along, and there's nothing, if it is remaining, that hasn't had an EPO test done on it.
Is it supposed to be that all samples are retained, or just a selection of?
No, it's not every single one. It's just a matter of storage capability. I mean, I think under our program so far, we've had around the ballpark of 12,000 tests done. So when you're talking about 12,000 A and B bottles, and they're about this big, you're talking about a lot of costs. They're these sub-zero freezers that the laboratories have, they put into, and number one, it's just a space, issue. I don't know if they have the space to put in 20 of these giant freezers. So I think at any given time, USADA in these laboratories are retaining maybe around 1,000 samples, I think is the number that they gave me. And again, it's strategic which samples they're keeping. They're not keeping a sample that there's no red flags on their passport. They're keeping those samples that the algorithm, in theory, would spit out saying, hey, there's something potentially going on here, let's hold on to that one. Due
to this test, have you directed for there to be more testing of EPO? I know they have a strategy, but have you said, let's inherit that cost and let's test?
Well, we talked specifically, obviously, this week about that. What they did say is the WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, has a guideline for all national anti-doping authorities. They say, here's the percentage of tests that you should allocate to special analysis EPO testing done on, based on our research and how many people we feel are potentially using EPO in order to have an effective program. Our EPO special analysis percentage, I was told this week, far outranks the WADA standard. So we test more EPO special analysis, I think, than the Olympic movement, and probably more than any other professional sports organization out there. So to add additional to that, I think we need to take a couple weeks and let things calm down. I know everybody's all excited now about this high profile, but I think from what I know of the percentages and what those recommended percentages are, that we have an effective program to detect EPO use.
Lastly for me, with TJ specifically, will you be issuing directives, or will there be something in place to make sure that he is tested? I mean, obviously he's got this 2 years away, but the concern is when guys are suspended, are they being tested enough that we know that they're clean when they come back?
Absolutely. It's part of the program that if you're under suspension and you still want to fight when that suspension's done, you are still part of that testing program. So again, USADA does not share with me when athletes are going to be tested, how often. I don't have any input other than if I get a tip on an athlete or a camp doing something, I'll pass that along to USADA, but I don't have input on how often someone's tested. But I got to assume someone who tests positive for such a serious drug like this is going to be tested pretty frequently. A good example kind of in that arena was the Russian recently that was suspended for life, and that was someone who was on suspension, was actively being tested, came back with a second positive test. They went back and tested him yet again as that case was being adjudicated, and he refused the third test, and that was a third violation. So I think real world example there, that even though you're on suspension, you're still going to be actively tested.
I said last thing, let me say, are there any other key messages or data points that you believe the public, fighters, media should know that because of the situation? Yeah,
I would just hope. Look, I'd never take any satisfaction in a positive test, no matter if it's the last guy on the roster or somebody as high profile as TJ. It disappoints me. I look inward at that point and say, what did I do wrong to not express that? Hey, there's a chance if you're doing something that you're going to get caught. Your legacy is going to be forever tarnished. So it's disappointing for me. But looking forward, you hope it's something that comes out disappointing like that. It sends that deterrent to the card. It's like, let TJ Dillashaw, one of our most high-profile fighters, if he's going to be suspended and caught for 2 years, it could happen to anybody on the roster. So that's what I would hope happens from this. It's something good comes out of it. Those that weren't listening and looking now are, and if they were even thinking about doing that, it is erased from their mind.